start decks for Overdress were released back in May of 2021 and were followed by set 1 merely a week later. Since then, we have received quite a few more sets. And with the Overdress anime having aired its final episode and the DivineZ era looming over the horizon, we thought it would be appropriate to look back at all the units we have received. Doing every nation in one video would make for quite a lengthy video, so we're going to break it up into the 6 main nations and then do all the extras in one last video. In today's entry, we are going to discuss the nation of Dark States. To start the list off, we have the first start deck unit, Bruce. Bruce has 3 separate forms that all round around Final Rush or Final Burst, a state in which you can enter when you accomplish the conditions. The first Bruce was introduced in the start decks and allowed for 5 attacks on your second grade 3 turn. This insane pressure was devastating in the early era of Overdress. This iteration of Bruce has a few cards restricted to him, but he is mostly just a ride deck unit nowadays. That is because Bruce received a grade 4 version similar to Mahar. Grade 4 Bruce could similarly restand units to provide more attacks, but unlike the original Bruce, he was able to restand himself to add extra pressure to your opponent. It even received a grade skipper to allow you to skip a turn. Both of these forms solely rely on Final Rush, however Bruce's latest form can go further beyond to Final Burst. Viamance Bruce is able to enter Final Rush during your battle phase if you control exclusively Diabolos units. However, if your opponent were to be grade 3 or greater, then you enter Final Burst. Final Burst is considered Final Rush as well, so any effects regarding to Final Rush would still be active. Viamance only had access to 4 attacks until recently when he gained access to a 5th attack. Bruce is a true classic of Overdress and one that defined the meta for quite a while. Moving on from that, we have a unit that shines into premium more than it does in Overdress. I'm referencing the boy, Barrow Magnus. A unit very reminiscent of Dark Irregular, with its ability relying on the amount of cards in Soul. Card draw, power, plus crit, and multi-attack. The deck has everything on one card, and yet has rarely seen much success in the competitive scene. Thankfully, it receives indirect support every set, as well as receiving some direct support here and there. Next, we have the glitter version of Barrow Magnus, Chaos. Chaos has 2 forms, and just like Barrow, who cares about cards in Soul, Chaos requires you to have different named cards in Soul. The ability to pump out 5 attacks where your opponent is a grade 2 gave this deck quite a hefty amount of pressure. This was only increased with Chaos' second form, which provided him with a critical increase effect, as well as ways to recur cards from Soul. Chaos is a very niche deck, and just like Barrow has yet to really shine, but it also gains support from many generic cards. Let's now talk about the 2 encounter decks in Dark States, Chronojet Dragon and Lukier. Chronojet Dragon introduced us to Stride again and the idea of Crest. We will be receiving a generic Energy Crest in DivineZ, and maybe Chronojet was a test for this new mechanic. Chronojet debuted in a Stride deck set that required almost no changes to perform well. I believe you pretty much added swirlers and maybe effect triggers, and it could perform just as well as any other meta deck currently available. But following that, we had Lukier, who although being quite strong, has failed to really break through to the higher tiers. Its strategy allows you to call units from Soul, and then you can return them to draw some cards. Having received a promo hasn't changed the deck much, but it can only go up considering what it already has access to. Now, let's get into the biggest portion of this video, the mask units. There are 4 mask units in Dark States, which is the highest of all the nations. We will be discussing the base form, and then the mask form, and any forms that might come after. To start off, we'll start with Greedon, the Mobster Dragon, who in his base form has the ability to restand himself and changes your max health from 6 to 7. This iteration of Greedon can restand himself 3 times a turn if you are able to set it up properly. But now, let's put a mask on him. Introducing Greedon Mask. Trading in his ability to restand multiple times for the ability to attack with your rearguards. This version was able to break into the meta, and I believe has won a couple regional qualifiers. I believe mostly due to its insane pressure and consistency. Given you're able to find the Greedon Mask in time, the deck can perform incredibly well. But next up on our Masks tour is Almagestar. The original form Unica relies on binding critical triggers to retire units, gain a crit, and even a drive. However, the biggest downside is that you have to bind crits meaning that even if you have more drives, you have to have less triggers in deck. So, did the mask form solve this issue in some way? No. It did provide the deck with a 4th attack, but the exchange wasn't great. Biko, which is the mask form of Unica, no longer gains a crit and requires you bind at least 4 crits to be able to give the unit you restand 10k. If you don't, then all it does is gains 5k. Almagestar has yet to receive a single promo, and her support hasn't helped her much. So hopefully we see some better support in the DivineZ era for this girl. Maybe a new form that could maybe mitigate the loss of triggers, or maybe some sort of normal unit that could count itself as a trigger to, not force you to sacrifice triggers. But let's move on from Almagestar to the mask unit that best uses the masks. That being Aminagrucio, a cat snake demon that can reduce the shield of your opponent's triggers, as well as negating the power gains provided by them when damaged. The base form can help you find a mask or its mask form. So let's talk about his mask form, which gains the ability to restand. Aminagrucio mask is a strong contender, but he needs just a bit more to really cement himself in the top tiers. Having access to both Dragon Tree markers, constant searches of both mask unit, Aminagrucios, and being able to activate Persona Ride almost every turn gives this deck an insane amount of consistency. But let's talk about the final mask unit, Drejuled. Drejuled was introduced in the trial deck. The trial deck form is almost identical to his main set form, with the major change being that the main set form had an activate ability and the trial deck form had a rearguard ability. Drejuled can soul blast 4 cards with different grades to put your opponent's Vanguard power to 1, negating any buffs or defensive triggers they might have gotten before it attacked. He would also gain a crit when he did this, and this is an ability that pretty much carries over for all of them. Then let's look at the mask form, which kept the power reduction ability, but also gave Drejuled access to removal. All 3 of these forms have access to restanders in the form of Rock Augur and Emposa, which gave all 3 of these forms access to 5 attacks. Ignis is a grade 4 that requires a Soul Blast 5 of different grade units, but for the added cost you get to retire all of your opponent's boosters. He also gains a crit, and he reduces the power of the front row to 0 instead of 1, which, although not seeming like the biggest change, does actually help you when guarding. So being put to 0 means that you don't have that extra 1 that would be annoying when you were attacking with Drejuled. He can also provide you with a 15k boost to your front row, and has his own restander in Varpula. But with that, we have concluded the mask section of this video. We are not done yet though. We have some unique vanguards, starting off with Favernil, which you can only play 1 copy of your deck. The trade-off here is that he gains power and critical naturally. He is also able to restand if the grades of the cards in Soul add up to 13. He prioritizes retiring your opponent's units to fuel his soul count. He did receive a deck set which provided him with 2 direct support cards, one giving him access to Persona Ride and the other access to countercharging. The deck is quite strong in its own right, but it still needs some extra love to properly establish itself. Then, following Favernil, we have Baphometus, who is a Dark States version of Bastion. This means he adores grade 3 units and provides them with boost and shield. He also has a very strong guard restriction, requires you to call 3 cards to Guardian Circle when he attacks. Then, following him, we have Time Stamping Dragon, who is similar to Time Leap from the G era. He can bind a unit, and then depending on the unit's grade, he can either gain triple drive if it's a grade 3 or greater, or he can call a unit with a grade +1 from the unit you bound. Being introduced as a promo, and a very recent one at that, means that he has very little in the way of direct support, and pretty much relies on any generic cards to help him function. We are very close to the end here with just 2 units left. Alter Slaughter is a grade 3 that requires you to Soul Blast 6 grade 0s to give your board an extra 10k. Similar to Timestamp, He doesn't have any direct support, and again relies on generic cards to play, although there are some cards that do help his strategy almost exclusively, so they could be considered his direct support. And we have seen decks like Alden receive a grade 0 promo, and we already have things like Trickstar and Trick Moon, so if they were to give him a grade 0 that counted as more than 1 in soul or something of, that sense, he could probably level up slightly. And alright, we are now on to the last unit, and just like in Dragon Empire, we have an obligatory include. Arwing is another unit that for some strange reason has a Vanguard effect. He can Soul Blast 1 to gain 5k. And again, there's not really anything here, similarly to Maynard and Musashi Armor from the last episode. They're just kind of here because we have to include all units that can be your Vanguard. But with that, we conclude the Dark States portion of the look back at Overdress. Join us next time for the Brandgate edition. Thank you all for watching.